Hi, my name is Mara Catherine Brenner, and this is an instructional video for doing a provisional cast on using an interchangeable needle cord or a second circular needle. To start, I need a cord from an interchangeable needle, and I have attached to this cord an adapter so that once I have my stitches cast on, I can attach the two ends to create a loop so no stitches are going to slip off. In addition, I have my working needles. For this video, I'm using Haya Sharps. I like that they have a nice flexible cable. It makes it easier when you're casting on the stitches and working those stitches. So to get started, I'm going to take my cord and my working yarn. I'm using Merino DK from Republic of Wool. And to start, I'm going to create a slip knot. And place it on my interchangeable needle cord. Secure it. Keep in mind that this slip knot is not going to be a stitch. This is just to secure your yarn to the cable while you're casting on the stitches. I'm going to like to slide the knot down to about the middle of the cord, just so that I'm secure that none of the stitches are going to slide off the end as I'm casting on. So during this whole casting on process, my right hand is going to be holding my working needle, the end of the cable, and my tail end of yarn. So I hold all three of those together with my right hand. With my left hand, I'm going to hold the other end of the cable and my working yarn. And to do that, I take my index finger and my thumb, place them in between the cable and the working yarn, and then secure them in my palm with my other fingers. So the working yarn is going over my thumb, and the cable is going over my index finger. And now we're ready to cast on stitches. To cast on the stitches, we're going to be alternating between going in front of the cable and behind the cable with the working needle. The entire time the cable will run parallel to the working needle underneath it. At no time is the cable going to become twisted around your working needle. All of the odd stitches will be done by moving your working needle in front of the cable. All of the even stitches, will be done by moving your working needle behind the cable. So odd stitches in front, even stitches behind. I'm going to cast on 13 stitches for this demonstration. So stitch number 1, it's an odd stitch. We go in front of the cable, under the working yarn from back to front, and then back up above the cable. Second stitch is an even stitch. So we go behind the cable, underneath the yarn, and back up over the cable. And you can see at no point is our cable getting twisted around our working needle. Stitch number 3. It's an odd stitch, so we go in front, under the working yarn, and back up. Stitch number 4, behind, all the way around that yarn, and back up. Stitch number 5, in front and up, stitch number 6, behind and up, stitch number 7 in front and up, stitch number 8 behind, all the way to the front of that working yarn, and then bring it back up behind the cable. Let's see what stitches we are. I've lost my count always. 2, 4, 6, 8. So number 9, we know we're going to go in front because it's an odd number stitch. 10 is behind and up. If you're going to be working a large number of stitches, you're going to want to make sure to reposition those stitches on the needle so they're not getting crowded up in the front. You can also pull them with your cable, kind of spread them out. Reposition the yarn in your hand. If you lose count and you're not sure which way you need to go next, just count the number of stitches on your needle. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I want 13. My next stitch is number 11, so I'm going to go in front and up. 12, behind and up. 13, my last stitch, front and up. So currently I have 13 stitches on my needle, but only 12 stitches on the cable. So to create the last stitch on the cable, you can see that my yarn is in front of the cable. I'm going to take the working yarn, bring it down underneath the cable, and back up through between the cable and the working needle. So I've created that last stitch. Now I'm going to turn my work. Making sure that that yarn stays in between the needle and the cable. And now I'm going to attach the interchangeable cable with its adapter to create a nice circle so none of my stitches can slip off. Now I move on to working in whatever pattern the instructions call for. I'm going to knit this in garter stitch. So I'm going to knit a few rows just so that we have enough fabric so I can turn around and show you what we do when we work the stitches off of the cable. So I'll knit a few quick rows. Remember, make sure that that yarn stays in between the cable and the needle and comes up from behind the needle when you're working that first stitch. Some people were asking me how I tension my yarn. I like to wrap it around my pinky finger and then go up over my index finger. Sometimes I do it from back to front, sometimes I do it from front to back. It depends on the stitch pattern that I'm working on and really just my mood that day, I guess. So, as you work this first row of stitches, you'll notice it's going to feel a little awkward because you're working straight off of that cable. Just make sure that you're securing the cable underneath the needle so that it doesn't slide up and try to twist itself around the needles. And you're just working the stitches. So we've knit that first row. After you knit that first row, you can really see you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 stitches on your needle. and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 stitches on your cable. And from here on out, you just work in whatever stitch pattern your instructions call for. Some reasons you would use a provisional cast on like this is if you were planning to, like for a cowl or a shoulder seam, if you were planning to graft the stitches together at the end. You also might use a cast on like this if the pattern called for working first in one direction and then knitting in the other direction. You'd pick up those provisionally cast on stitches to work in the second direction. I'll work one more row here, and then show you what to do when working the stitches off of the cable. So now you can see our fabric is starting to form, and you can really see the two separate ends of the piece of fabric. So if I'm going to go on and work on the stitches on the cable now, I need to first move the stitches that I have been working on onto the cable of this needle. If I was going to be working the opposite direction for a long period of time, I would do the same thing that I had done on this end. I would hook this cable together so that the stitches won't slide off. I'm not going to do that because we're just going to be working one row for this. I am going to take the needles that I have been working on this cable and attach them to the other cable. Move that adapter. That just makes it easy for me so I don't have to go searching for another set of the same size needles. So now I want to make sure that I'm continuing in that garter stitch pattern. So I'm going to start from the side that has the purl bumps right up against the cable. Slide my stitches onto the needle and get a new working yarn to attach. One very important point when doing a provisional cast on in this way is that when you go to work these stitches that have been sitting on the cable, they are going to alternate in orientation, meaning that if you just knit them all straight, every other stitch would be twisted. So if you're going to graft stitches, I would suggest just slipping them and reorienting them. Since we're just going to knit them, we're going to knit every other stitch through the back loop to prevent having a twisted stitch. Sometimes that first stitch is a little tight. once you cast it on directly onto the cable. Okay, so this stitch has the correct orientation. The front leg of the stitch is in front. This next stitch is oriented backwards, and you can tell that because the back leg of the stitch is closer to the end of the needle than the front leg of the stitch. So to keep that stitch from being twisted when we knit it, we're going to knit it through the back loop. And again, it alternates. So this stitch, the front leg of the stitch is closer to the tip of the needle, which means it's the correct orientation, so we will knit it through the front. This next stitch, the back leg of the stitch is closer to the tip of the needle, so we're going to knit that through the back. And you just continue to alternate that as you work those stitches. If you don't like knitting through the back, or you just need to reorient the stitches to graft them, you would just slip it off the needle and then place it back on in the correct orientation. So now we've knit all 13 of our stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. We have one stitch left on our needle, but remember that's just the slip knot and that doesn't count as a stitch. So you just slip that off the needle, undo the knot, and you'll weave in that end when you're finishing your project. So there you go. That is how you do a provisional cast on using the cord of an interchangeable needle or a second circular needle. Remember, if you use a second circular needle, make sure you're using the same size needle as the pattern calls for. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day. If you have any questions, make sure to ask them, and I'll try to get them answered as soon as possible. Thank you.